You know how passionate I've been about your case, Ken. And I want to apologize to you on behalf of the American people for what our government put you through for 4 years. What I went through is that much compared to what you and Angel went through. And I'm praying God moves upon the heart of President Trump to end this nightmare for all of you. Hello, Ken and Angel. How are you doing today?
Hey.
It's great to have you. Just to set this up so that everybody understands what we're doing, I have with me Ken and Angel Harrelson. Ken, of the infamy of being one of the Oath Keepers who entered the Capitol on January 6, 2021. We're going to go back and tell some of their backstory of who they are. We're going to talk about why Ken was there that day. We're going to talk about the reasons why Ken entered the Capitol, and then we're going to delve into quite a bit of the legal, let's just call it the legal, not only dragnet, but the jeopardy that he was faced with for almost now 4 years of his life. And it continues to this day, as evidenced by the fact that unfortunately you're not here in the studio with me in Dallas because you were not allowed to travel because you're still under probationary restrictions. And even though they have the right to extend that to you, that privilege or that permission, they chose not to, and have also done so a couple of times before when you've requested that. So you're still under that persecution from the federal government for being nothing more than a non-violent J6er that day. So that's the groundwork laid, and from where we're going to start with you guys today. So I want to start out, Ken, just why don't you really quickly give me the brief bio history of how you guys met, and then I'll take you from there.
Well, I was doing my tour of duty in the Army out in Louisiana, and we met out there and developed a relationship and got married. And then after I got medically retired from the Army, we moved out to Georgia, then Florida, and that's where we're at now.
Now, you met Angel, though, during a hurricane disaster situation, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. We were tasked with doing hurricane relief for, I think it was, what was it? Gustav. And we met during that time period. And, we just kind of started off as friends, and it developed into the relationship we have now. So.
And that's an important aspect of this story, because ultimately it was part of you guys meeting in that type of situation, you doing disaster relief while I guess you were out of Fort Polk in Louisiana. Is that correct? And
yeah.
and then interestingly enough, fast forward several years later, if I understand the story correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're basically coming into relationship with the Oath Keepers was because you saw on their website that they did similar disaster relief type operations, and you thought, okay, well, great, this kind of resonates with me. I met my wife doing a similar thing. Yeah. This sounds like a good path for me. Real briefly, Angel, give me your version of that. I'm going to get a little different version, obviously, from the female perspective.
Well, when I first met him, of course, it was right after Hurricane Gustav hit my home. I had to relocate, and he was one of the soldiers that I had met, and he was sweet, kind. He was just one of those guys that would just give you your shirt off your back and help another person. But it's just, I like that kind of people. So we became friends, and I had to relocate, and he helped me with relocating and everything.
What year did you guys get married?
2009.
And this is a blended family, right?
Yes.
All right. Tell me about the kids.
I have two boys. They're in their mid to late 20s. And he has two younger kids.
Okay.
and they're in their late teens and early 20s.
Okay. And so now you guys are living in Florida, and Ken, you were going through some tough times post Army, isn't that correct?
Yeah, I was medically retired for injuries that I acquired during a couple of training accidents. The Army spit me out. I got put into the VA system, and instead of treating the injuries, they just put me in pain management and pumped me full of drugs, Loratabs and Xanaxes and everything else under the sun. And I did that regimen until 2013, and I was, begging the VA to, correct the problems, and all they wanted to do was, keep pumping me full of painkillers. And I basically stopped cold turkey everything and took it upon myself to rehabilitate myself, get back into, working and rebuild my life, because I was in a rough place.
Yeah, and
because of that,
going cold turkey is not recommended, obviously. What did that do to you psychologically and otherwise?
The doctors were actually impressed by the way I handled it, because it was almost like I had never been on any medications. The more psychological part of it was being on the medication.
Wow.
Like the medication just had me I couldn't function. But I had no other avenues at the time other than to take the medication, and they kept compounding it. It went from Loratabs to Suboxone and all these other medications that they put me on Suboxone, which I think is a medication for drug addicts, but they were trying to use it as a pain management drug. And I spent about 2 weeks on it, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. I just threw it all away. And it took a couple of months of my system getting cleared out, but as soon as that those chemicals started leaving the body, it was like a weight lifted off. I was thinking clearly, got motivation and drive back, and just, it was better for me not to be on those medications.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're a skilled welder, and I guess you were working for SpaceX as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, after the stuff with the VA, once that cleared up, I took a job at the port in Jacksonville, refitting gantry cranes, because Jacksonville Port had been tasked with accepting the largest container ships in the country. So they had to raise all the cranes up, extend the booms out, a lot of ironwork, metal work. So that was one of the first jobs I had after the military, after that 2.5 to 3 years of being drugged out of my mind on pain pills. And shortly after that job ended, I got a call to come down here where we're at now to Cape Canaveral for a 90-day contract with SpaceX to start building Pad 39. And when that 90-day contract came up, the deadline on it, instead of getting laid off, I got hired on permanently to the company, and I stayed there probably till 2018.
Yeah. So let's jump forward now, because there was something that was either missing in your life or something that compelled you to look for an additional outlet of service. I mean, obviously you had been in the service, you had taken the oath to defend your country, you had honored that, medically discharged, retired, and went through what you went through with the VA. But at some point you still felt like you had a hole in your life and you were missing something, and that led you to seek out what ultimately became a relationship with the Oath Keepers. How did that happen? Can you bring me up to that point?
Yeah, we had hurricane, what was it? It was Irma, wasn't it?
Um, I think so.
Yeah, we had a bad hurricane hit here, and we evacuated for it. And when we came back, like Cocoa Beach was just destroyed. Cape Canaveral was destroyed. We were out of power for weeks. And I saw an opportunity to volunteer locally to do disaster relief. I was going around neighborhoods, cutting trees out of roads. And some of my buddies, they were like, man, you kind of got a knack for this stuff. You ought to try to find a group to volunteer with to do these types of things. And that's when I started seeking out, organizations. And I reached out to a few and never got anything back. And I kept putting in Google search engine, disaster relief, organizations that do disaster relief volunteering. And in the top 5 were the Oath Keepers on every one of those searches. You know what I mean? Google was dinging it. And, I reached out and provided all my information and background, and, they were like, it's a good fit. So I ended up joining the Oath Keepers. And
About what time period was that? How long before January 6th did you actually sign on and join the Oath Keepers?
Probably late 2018, early 2019. There really wasn't much going on with the organization at that time. There was some hurricanes that hit the Panhandle and Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. That the Oath Keepers were running disaster relief operations in several locations. So I was using my vehicle to haul supplies, things of that nature. But I didn't participate because it was so far away. It was, travel one way, drop things off, come back to the home front. And, my main focus was really locally. So that one of the things that spurred my, they had a program called the Community Preparedness Teams. So they were, seeking out ex-military, law enforcement, and first responders that were willing to go out into the communities and teach everyday citizens how to do things for themselves, how to have alternate communications, how to purify water, how to, be able to survive without electricity or any things of that nature during, disasters. So I started building on that. Yeah. And that's where, I started meeting some of the other guys involved. That was probably late 2019, early 2020. We started, actually conducting like classes on communications, how to survive during a disaster.
Did you do any of the so-called what they call security details with the Oath Keepers prior to January 6, 2021? Like, for instance, when all the riots erupted in what they call the Summer of Love of 2020 after the death of George Floyd, were you involved in any of those security details that the Oath Keepers conducted?
Yeah, I volunteered and participated in one in Louisville, Kentucky, during the Breonna Taylor riots that went on. The operation probably went on for 2 weeks. I went for 3.5 days. Mm-hmm. And provided security for 3 locations, 2 businesses, 3 locations. One business was a pawn shop that had 2 locations, and the other business was a convenience store that was right across the street from the pawn shop. But what had happened was some people from some of these other outfits had gone into this convenience store and wanted to hang up their propaganda And the business owner said, "Hey, look, I can't put that stuff up because I don't want to offend half my customers." And they said, "Well, we'll just burn this business down then." And he reached out to the Oath Keepers and to a couple of other organizations that were there, and we decided to step up and put ourselves in between, in the gap for those businesses so they wouldn't lose their businesses.
Now, these were minority-owned businesses, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and of course the backstory, which of course most Americans won't know about, because if they're getting their news from CNN, MSNBC, and the mainstream media in general, is they don't understand that in this particular operation, as with so many others, is that the Oath Keepers were reached out to, Oath Keeper leadership was reached out to by minority business owners saying, "Can you please help us protect our businesses against these rioters," who were largely either BLM or they were Antifa or some other leftist group that would attack, loot, burn down, destroy these businesses in these cities and neighborhoods where these riots were taking place. So when you got to Louisville, as an example, were you carrying a weapon?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was fully armed, but that was only because the rioters and protesters were riding around, hanging out of car windows with rifles.
Right.
I mean, it was like the Wild West.
And
I mean, all night long you'd hear gunshots. I think a police officer, the second night I was there, a police officer got shot 4 blocks away from where we were at.
Did you guys ever take fire?
No.
And tell me, from your perspective, were you more just the visualization of you guys there in what would be considered a military looking type kit, with body armor or the camouflage, the Oath Keepers colors, and obviously carrying either an AR or a sidearm, that sort of thing? Was that just all that was needed to prevent the looters and the rioters and otherwise nefarious individuals from attacking those businesses?
Yeah, it was definitely a deterrent. We only had one incident where a group of protesters marched in on us in a parking lot. We were getting ready to relieve the guys that were there during the day. I was on a night team, so we were doing our operations at night, and they marched a group in on us and basically were trying to instigate and agitate an incident into happening. The leader of the BLM organization there in Louisville were getting into our faces, telling us he was going to knock our teeth out. They had individuals circling the group with firearms. They were, getting into the faces and pushing members that had firearms. You know what I mean? It seemed like they were trying to instigate an incident to happen, but they couldn't do it, so they eventually left. And after that, there was no other incidents, really.
And of course, through the trials, which we'll get to here in a moment, I've seen the videos of that moment. There's plenty of videos of when they were trying to provoke you guys into violent action. But the most important thing, again, as we talk about what people don't know and do know about the Oath Keepers and the misinformation, disinformation, largely created by a supportive mainstream media of the narrative, as we refer to it, is that they don't understand that in 13 years at this point of the Oath Keepers' existence, there had never been an illegal action taken by an Oath Keeper. There had never been a single charge. There had never been one single provoked or unprovoked violent reaction during thousands of operations, whether it was the disaster relief or these types of security operations, going all the way back to Ferguson, Missouri, after that particular situation, where that area or that incidents of violence erupted there for several days, several weeks at a time, and the Oath Keepers were there providing security again for minority businesses. And so, real quickly, Angel, while he's out there doing that, did you ever suspect or feel like that he might be involved with some weird, hard extremist, right-wing, white supremacist militia organization? Was that ever on your mind?
No, I knew he was being safe, and I trusted him to take care of himself, and I knew he was trying to protect others, so I had no worries.
Yeah,
and I had faith he'd come home.
Yeah. Well, let's jump to the days coming up on January 6th. Now, as you know, Ken, there was a lot of activity taking place on the Oath Keepers chat groups, whether it was on Signal or Facebook or whatever, wherever they were communicating at the time. There was a lot of preparation because there were events taking place in the lead up to January 6th, which were, of course, after the election. There was the election of 2020, which was, of course, was very controversial and contested by some people. And then there were marches that took place in D.C. in November and early December that the Oath Keepers were there and participated in. Stuart Rhodes spoke at and gave some speeches at as well. There was a lot of planning for those events. And again, no violence happened. No Oath Keepers were provoked into violence whatsoever. Obviously in D.C., you guys, or the Oath Keepers, weren't allowed to carry their weapons in general, but those who had the law enforcement background and had the specific certification could carry in the district. But when it came time for January 6th, there was an order went out even from the Oath Keeper leadership that even if you are a retired law enforcement and have the right to carry weapons into the district, we're not doing that on that day. But you weren't planning on going. You didn't go to the November event or the December event, did you?
No, I didn't.
And you were not planning on going on January 6th either.
No, politics wasn't really never my thing. The organization was promoted on Google as a nonpartisan group of former military, law enforcement, and first responders that were volunteering their time to help civilian populations during disaster relief and community preparedness training for disaster relief and things of that nature. And that's all I ever had a real interest in. I kind of spoke out a little bit with some of the guys that had planned on going to some of these political events, but I mean, people do what they're going to do. You know what I mean?
So who did you vote for in 2020?
No one.
Who did you vote for in 2016?
No one.
2012?
No one.
2008?
No one.
Had you ever voted for a president before in your life?
No.
Why is that?
I was raised in a military family, and I was always told that it didn't really matter who was the president. You may not have to respect that person, but you respect that office. And I just never had a inclination to vote. It just wasn't, never anything that crossed my mind.
What about you, Angel? Were you politically inclined?
No, I hated politics. I didn't want nothing to do with politics at all.
So you guys really were
I never voted.
You guys really were a match made in heaven. I wish all of us could divest ourselves of, the obsession we have with politics, or the need to feel like we need to be obsessed if everything was working properly. But put that aside. Let's go back to the incident itself that drew you to January 6th in the first place. You did not go to Washington, D.C. on January 6th because you were contesting an election result. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I'd been asked multiple times after the event was announced, and I turned it down. Um, I kept telling them, politics just isn't my thing. I didn't feel the need to go. And then after the first, I got a phone call, and in that phone call, I was told, "Look, we've been tasked to provide security for some speaking engagements on the 5th and 6th. And one of those groups have been receiving death threats and threats of violence against them. And we would feel more comfortable having someone like you on the ground because of your military background and experience, and your awareness and ability to spot things that may seem a little off, or and at first I said I really couldn't, and then they said, well, we'll your travel will be covered, your room and board will be covered, everything will be paid for. All you have to do is get in a vehicle and go.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, all right, I'll go. I mean, because of the way it was explained to me, it didn't matter that these activists, if you want to call them, were putting on events being conservative or Republican. If it had been Democrats and I had got a phone call and it was explained to me the same way, I would have went and provided security for a Democratic organization, because it's everyone's right. Everyone has a First Amendment right, and I took an oath to serve and defend not just the Constitution, but the people of the United States, not just Republicans and conservatives, but all people. There's a creed that we say in the Army, and in that creed, it says, I serve the people of the United States, not I serve one party or another. So, I felt obligated to go when the situation was relayed to me the way it was.
Now, so you had a vehicle show up at your house, a van, I believe it was, and you jumped in the van, and I think you left on the 4th, is that right? Or the 5th, the morning of the 5th?
Yeah.
Yeah, something.
We left on the 4th.
Okay.
We had planned on not going to DC until the night of the 5th, but there was a phone call that was received at like 2 a.m. on the 5th. And the person on the other end said, hey, we need you guys here 7 a.m. There's going to be speaking engagements on the east side of the Capitol, and we need hands to provide security. So we cut our stay short where we were at and carried on to DC.
Now, one of the things that was interesting that I learned covering the trial, as you guys know, I was there every single day for 9 weeks of that trial. And one of the most interesting aspects, as it specifically relates to your case, Ken, is that you had not, because you had not planned on going at all. In fact, you didn't plan on going to the Million MAGA March or to the Jubilee March or to the January 6th event, that you had not been participating in the social media interactions or the private chat groups interactions with that. And that was something that, of course, the government was ultimately forced to acknowledge, even though they didn't want to do that, and they tried to even twist that a little bit. But you weren't even involved on social media at all, right?
No, I didn't have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, nothing.
Which made it very difficult for the government to even try to pin this on you during that time, that you had a participation in some conspiracy. But we'll come back to that. Let's get to January 5th and 6th. So on the 5th, you were providing security details for some of these, we'll call them side stage speeches and things that were the leading up to January 6th. Another interesting thing, again, that the American people are going to find fascinating, I think, is that all of you guys were doing this voluntarily. This was actually because of the law, basically in every jurisdiction, because you guys weren't card-carrying members of law enforcement, agencies at the time. In order for you to legally provide security, and not be part of a security organization, you know, like whether it's Wells Fargo or some other big national private security group, you guys actually had to do this as volunteers, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So by and large, you guys are not getting paid for this. Your expenses were being covered, and that's it. And so volunteering yourself for sometimes actually, as we talked about in Louisville, dangerous work with people driving around with guns hanging out of their weapons, coming up and spitting in your face and taunting you, trying to elicit violent reactions out of you so that they could make a story out of you. You didn't give into it. And so when you get to January 6th, you're just back into that same mode again. And then on the morning of the 6th, the first thing you guys do is you end up at the Ellipse inside the VIP section at the invitation of the Secret Service. Is that right?
Yeah, we were escorted in the Ellipse and carried straight to the VIP section, and we had an assigned area to sit and wait. They even came and asked some of the members to hand out the signs. And some of the guys were tuned into the speeches and what was going on. Me and a couple of the other guys, we were more observant of the crowd because we knew we were getting ready to move a group of principals from the Ellipse to the east side of the Capitol building where they had a permitted speaking event.
Right.
And we were trying to figure out the nuances of moving 15 to 20 people through a crowd as thick as oil.
Right.
I mean, it was pretty dense.
Additionally, you chose not to wear a military style kit that day. Why did you kind of go plain clothes?
Well, Friday, I say, on the 5th, we did the security details for the Women of Trump from Virginia, and Roger Stone was across the street at the Supreme Court building. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the guys were there with their kit on. I was told to be kind of incognito, not to wear the kit. That way there wouldn't be too many eyes raised. So I didn't. And then we had a little talk about it at the end of that day, and we came to the agreement not to wear the body armor. But there was a phone call made that night, and one of the people involved with the principals that we were providing security for specifically asked for those guys to be wearing body armor, and I didn't see a reason for it. And plus, I was told not to by who, I was led to believe that was the person in charge over the security detail. Mm-hmm. That person specifically asked us not to wear it. And then, one of the principals for the detail asked those guys to wear their stuff.
Yeah.
And, I reiterated to those guys like, hey, so-and-so said not to wear that stuff. And, oh, well, they want us to wear it. They want a show of, force kind of, so that way we don't get messed with. And so that was one of the reasons why I decided not to wear it. I didn't feel it was necessary. And plus it was asked not to wear it.
So let's talk about one of the more controversial aspects that were used against you guys in the trial over and over and over again, yet it was not an illegal thing that you guys did. Nevertheless, legitimate questions are raised. When you did arrive, and people and oath keepers were arriving from various parts of the country, there was a significant group, obviously, that came up from Florida. Rhodes came up from Texas. There were some oath keepers from Arizona and other places. It was not a large number of oath keepers, by the way. Out of the 35 to 40,000 members there was only, according to the government tracking, they said there was only about 25 to 30 Oath Keepers that they identified in this crowd of tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. That's actually a very, very small contingent, but you didn't need that many because you didn't have that many details going on that day. But you guys did arrive in Virginia at the hotel with a rather significant arsenal of weapons. What was your feeling about that? And when you were told to bring your rifle and ammunition and that sort of thing, what was going through your mind at the time?
Well, it was first said where we were going to stay at on the 5th. The place we stayed at, that person had a range on his property, and we were going to do some shooting. It had been discussed that we might do some hog hunting and things of that nature. So I really didn't think twice about bringing, my rifle. And then after we received the phone call, like, hey, we got to go. We can't hang out on the 5th. We got to go. And it was like, well, where are we going to put our stuff? And it was like, well, they got to set up at this hotel in Virginia, and they were calling that location a QRF location.
Right.
And I kind of questioned that, but then the way it was explained to me was that, if they were worried that things were going to go south in DC, and that if things went south in DC, they had guys set up outside of the district in Virginia that were going to come in and recover us. And then we would go back to an area and we would wait to see what unfolded, whether the Insurrection Act was signed and, just people were worried that bad things were going to happen.
Yeah, and of course the QRF is the Quick Reaction Force, which is a military terminology, and that was something that obviously that, again, we learned from the trial that the Oath Keepers were pretty, that was pretty much standard operating procedure for the Oath Keepers, was to have some sort of QRF available to them when they were involved in security operations. They'd had a history of doing this before, but it just makes it more complicated when we're talking about DC, because you can't legally bring those weapons into the district, which you guys did not do. None of the weapons that were brought to and left in the Virginia hotel room were illegal weapons. There were no crimes committed related to those firearms, yet in the trial they obsessively basically did a psyop on the jury over and over and over again, showing the delivery, the carry, you carrying in a stack of gun cases on a luggage carrier into the hotel. They showed you guys out. They showed you guys in September of 2020 at a firing range taking shooting training, which, those of us that live in the parts of the country that have actual gun rights, Second Amendment rights, this is stuff that we participate in most states in the country. But the people of D.C. and the jury in D.C. sees that and they say, oh my God, what is this? There's no such type of activity that takes place in D.C. for most of the people in the general public there. And we were watching that psyop taking place on the jury, and nevertheless, again, the legitimate question is had the president signed and invoked the Insurrection Act? Stuart Rhodes, chairman, founder of the Oath Keepers, had promised the president in an open letter that you guys would go to the White House and would defend him. Would you have done that?
It's hard to say, man, depending on, the situation and what could have happened. There was a lot of chatter online because the organization had people monitoring Antifa groups online, monitoring other, far left extreme groups, and they had moles and plants in these groups, and these groups were talking about blocking off streets, shooting civilians, taking the White House. I mean, there was posts openly, publicly on Twitter of Antifa members saying that they were going to storm the White House if Donald Trump
Right.
signed the Insurrection Act. So, I mean, that's it's hard to say, but
Yeah. Of course, these things didn't happen. The point
it
being,
all depended on the
right?
circumstances.
The president did not invoke the Insurrection Act. The Oath Keepers did not go back across the river and get their guns. They did not come back into the district and use their weapons at all, either just carrying them illegally or using them violently. These are things that didn't happen because the things that were set up and the warnings and the intelligence and all these things that were calling for much higher levels of violence than what actually took place that day, none of that transpired. But nevertheless, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this with you guys because this is the part of the story that most everybody knows. So I'm just going to briefly go through the steps of what happened. You guys were at the Ellipse. You had your security detail, which actually included a couple of significant VIPs, Dr. Simone Gold being one of them, and her bodyguard, John Strand, who we've interviewed on this series before. And you accompanied them over there. You marched them, through that thousands of people, about a 1.5 mile walk over to that area where you thought that the legally permitted stage was going to be. By the time you got there, violence was already taking place on the west side of the Capitol. Everything had gone to a hell in a handbasket. The scheduled events that were supposed to take place did not take place. You never found the stage that was supposed to be set up. But it was in a different location than what you had assumed it to be. And then all of a sudden, the line breaks down on the east side. I'll never forget, you got a cigarette going, you look up from the videos and you're like, what the hell's going on over there? And then you and one of your partners with the Oath Keepers start walking over to observe what's taking place. Now, you guys eventually go up to the steps. You're seen on video singing the national anthem very enthusiastically with the crowd. Interestingly, there were flyers out talking about a protest on the steps. So most of the people that had seen those flyers did not know that they were inside a restricted zone at that time. You did not participate in any barricade break-ins. You did not participate in any door break-ins, any breaches like that. As a matter of fact, while that door was being attacked and the cops there at that door defending the Columbus doors on the east side were being attacked, you guys were so far down the steps that you had no idea that there was violence taking place. Now I'm reviewing this not for your sake. I'm just doing this so I can quickly get to where we want to go here. At any point, at any time, in those 3 or 4 days that you had just to even prep, 2 days really, to prep for going to DC, did you ever hear of either a direct order, an insinuated order of any kind for you and your partners in the Oath Keepers to attack the Capitol, enter the Capitol, breach the Capitol, or go after Congress members? Was there anything like that ever happened in your communications that you had with leadership?
No.
Was there any,
Not one time.
was there any discussion in the drive from Central Florida all the way to DC about that?
No.
You stopped in North Carolina and hooked up with some Oath Keepers there, right?
Yep.
Was there any discussion there about that?
Nope.
You get to DC on the 5th, and you guys are doing some security operations. You had your ground team, operations leader there, Whip Green. He was there. Did he ever order you guys to go into the Capitol?
No. Matter of fact, he was the one that gave out the order to not wear the body armor.
Did Stuart Rhodes send you a private message to attack the Capitol?
No. I didn't even know Stuart was in the area.
So I'm watching you in the trial singing the national anthem enthusiastically. Then the quote-unquote stack of Oath Keepers led by Kelly Meggs comes up and joins you guys. All of you are below the level where that door was being breached, but suddenly it is. And there's this huge surge of people going into the Capitol. And you joined that surge going in. Did you know that that door had been violently breached at the time?
No.
What compelled you to go in? Just the moment?
Well, so we were down singing the anthem, and someone come from up on that mezzanine, and we had a younger kid with us. He was standing off kind of like to the side of the group, and somebody come down and grabbed him and took him up the stairs. So we turned around and walked up the stairs, and it was weird, man. It was, people were chanting, "Oath Keepers, yeah, Oath Keepers, Oath Keepers." And the crowd just kind of opened up because we went up in a line.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the easiest way to maneuver through a crowd. You put your hand on someone's shoulder and you guys form a single file line and you make your way through the crowd. The crowd kind of opened up and let us walk right up in, and then the crowd collapsed around us. And when those doors come open, there was no way. My feet, I don't even think my feet were touching the ground. Like it was like a herd of cattle going through a cattle gate. Just, you can see it. In the video footage, people behind us pushing, and if you'd have tried to have gone left or right and fell,
yeah, you
would have been trampled. There really wasn't a way to turn to get out of the crowd.
So once you're inside the Capitol, and we're not going to spend any time on the stories that we've told in great detail. Here through the Blaze, and then of course you guys have done interviews with a lot of podcasters and other media, and you've told the story about you and Kelly and the other guys ultimately forming a line in front of Harry Dunn. Your first interaction with Harry Dunn is a well-known story. Anybody that doesn't know it, I encourage you to go right here on the Blaze. We have an entire segment at BlazeTV on YouTube. It's not behind the paywall. It's free for everyone to see, that tells the story about that, and it's in our Truth About January 6th series. And so that's why we're not going to go into the details of that here during this time. I want to get to the more important things that happened afterwards. So I'm going to do another quick lightning round and say, after you got into the Capitol, then all of a sudden you gathered in prayer. You guys are right there in the middle of the rotunda. I think Kelly Meggs led that prayer. You get up, a couple of you walk into what they call the small rotunda or the speaker's lobby, and then you see this interaction happening between some more agitated protesters. Harry Dunn, you go back and get Kelly, y'all line up, you defend him famously. The video evidence is conclusive that you did, in fact, de-escalate a very potentially deadly situation, which ultimately was turned around on its head, and you were accused of doing exactly the opposite. And we've proven that to be the case. And then you guys peacefully left, and you went outside, and then you gathered together with some of the other Oath Keepers. Most of you guys left town that day, including Kelly and Connie Meggs, driving home thinking they genuinely thought they were going to get a medal. They thought they had saved lives that day. Thought you guys were going to get a medal for what you did, and instead you get home and the whole world falls apart. So we fast forward to March. You're finally arrested. They show up. You're cleaning your gutters out on a ladder, and they show up. We have the videos of that, and they take you into custody, and everything changes at that point for not just yourself but so many, because now we're into the lawfare. So I apologize. I'm breaking some of the rules of doing an interview. I'm supposed to be letting you talk right now, but I'm going to get your reaction to some of this. Is that fast forwarding to about November or December of 2021, I actually read your charging documents, your statements of fact. And although I'd been writing stories about January 6th, I had not been compelled to follow the defendants, even though I was potentially going to be one myself. I was following other aspects and investigating other aspects related to January 6th. But it was reading your charging documents, and I saw in the charging documents at least 6 or 7 lies, flat out lies, that the FBI affiant who wrote that statement of facts lied about. I knew they were lies by the video evidence. I called up your attorney. I said, Brad, and I'm losing my mind. I'm just like going, I'm just raging at Brad over the phone. I'm thinking that this is so egregious, this just needs to be thrown out. And Brad's like, calm down, calm down. We know. But that's not the way this is going to go forward. This is not the way this is going to work. Well, by that time, I'm all in now, and I'm understanding the level of lawfare that is being imposed against the Oath Keepers. It was from there that I realized that you guys were being made scapegoats. You guys were being made into, as Jeffrey Nessler on the first day of the trial, pointing at you and saying these guys were the leaders, these guys were the tip of the spear of the insurrection, when you weren't even on the campus when the violence started. You were performing a security detail for VIPs, having no knowledge of what was going on at the Capitol. So, with the limited time that we have left today on this, Ken, how did you survive that 3.5 years? Because when I saw you at the trial, dude, you were unhealthy. You were vitamin deficient. Every aspect of you was screaming that you had been through some sort of physical abuse during that time. Briefly give me an idea of what happened when you were put into the system.
It wasn't bad here. Brevard County Sheriff's Department, they were great, professional. Seminole County, where I was held at in a federal holding facility over there, those guys were professionals. It started in Northern Neck Regional Jail. Insurrectionist, domestic terrorist. I was denied medical attention in Northern Neck, and eventually I was put in. They put me in the SHU, but they said it was for medical observations.
And the SHU being?
It's like the hole.
No, solitary confinement.
Solitary confinement.
Right.
There were some people there sympathetic, but then we get to Washington, D.C., and that was a totally different level of psychological and physical abuse. Most of the guards there, they were American.
Mm-hmm.
They were from the D.C. area. We were domestic terrorists, white supremacists. A few of them, once they got to know us, listened to our stories, changed their tune. A lot of them didn't. The guards that didn't, when they would transport us through the hallways, they would tell other inmates, hey, here's these domestic terrorists. You guys should do something about it, trying to incite other inmates to assault us. Really, in DC, the first year and a half, solitary confinement, 2.5 hours out of the cell a day.
Mm-hmm.
It was rough, but we had a camaraderie in there, that helped. A big thing was the outpouring of support from Americans. I got 6 50-gallon totes over there packed full of letters.
Wow.
Full of letters.
Now, on the flip side, Angel, you were subject to abuse of this system at home. You were not allowed to visit Ken at all. How long did you go without seeing him?
2 years.
2 years.
2 years because both of us made an agreement that we would not get vaccinated.
And obviously
And
they
that was
used
the
that against
reason.
you as well in the system.
Yes.
And then additionally, you were receiving terroristic threats and letters and things at home. So people were acquiring your home address and threatening you and
Yes.
accusing you guys of all manner of well, things that just weren't true about either one of you. And
Yes.
then the trial happened. We saw, and again, this is something we're not going to cover here. We saw the abuse of the system. We saw the lack of due process. Ken often was not even allowed to see his own attorney for long periods of time. And then we see the trial. We see that it was a fait accompli. It was, it was a kangaroo court. The end was already predetermined. But when we got to the sentencing hearing, the most amazing thing happened that I had ever seen. So the 9-week trial happened, and then it wasn't, and that ended in the very end of November of 2022. And then in May of 23 was the sentencing hearing, and I was sitting in the courtroom when Judge Maida said to you, he said, "Mr. Harrelson, I don't think that you're the man that the government has made you out to be." How did you react to that?
That was a surprise, given the way he had acted throughout the trial.
Well, this is, I think, the most important thing that we're talking about here right now, and that needs to be conveyed. And I'll wrap it up with this: is when Maida admitted that you were not the man that the government had made you out to be. The most significant thing that he admitted at that point is that the government had been lying about you for 9 weeks in that trial, and for the 2.5 years leading up, or the 2 years leading up to that trial. And if that admission is there, and with what we know about the federal officers that lied about you in that trial, if all of that can be brought forward and shown to the American people, then this whole thing needs to be blown up. And this is why we're going to continue to make this appeal in advance of January 20th. Mr. Trump, President Trump, please pardon everyone. I think that John Adams needs to be considered here when he took the defense of those soldiers who were involved in the Boston Massacre. And John Adams told that jury, he said, "I would rather 5 guilty go free than 1 innocent suffer." And that's where we're at. That's where I'm at on this. I think you guys will both agree, is it doesn't matter whether you were convicted of a felony, a misdemeanor. You were not convicted of a violent act at all. But nevertheless, those like you, Kelly Meggs sentenced to 12 years, Stuart Rhodes, who did no violence, didn't even go into the Capitol that day, 18 years. I believe that all of you guys need to get your pardons. They need to be let free, and that this national healing needs to begin on January 20th. And I'm sorry, sorry. You know how passionate I've been about your case, Ken. And I want to apologize to you on behalf of the American people for what our government put you through for 4 years. What I went through is that much compared to what you and Angel went through. And I'm praying that God moves upon the heart of President Trump to end this nightmare for all of you, and ultimately that there's some sort of compensation for it. And thank you guys for joining me today.
Thank you.
I'll talk to you soon. Love you guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.